Welcome to the Animation Happy Hour,
a podcast where we talk about breaking into the animation industry over a couple of drinks.
All opinions and views expressed in this podcast are solely our own and are not representative of the companies for whom we work. My name is Ben. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Katie, and we are all character animators working in feature film.
All right, so today we are resuming part 2 of our day in the life of a layout artist. If you haven't had a chance to listen to part 1 yet, we highly recommend doing so. Rocco and Dorian have been giving so much helpful info about this subject. Part 1 was released January 1st. It was our last episode. So definitely take a listen if you haven't, but if you have, without further ado, here is part 2 of our day in the life of a layout artist.
Yeah, so transitioning to question 3, who or what types of people might enjoy layout in your opinion? And I guess this question is kind of coming from a place of like, if, you know, we have listeners who are in high school or something and they're sort of pondering different parts of the pipeline, like what might drive somebody to layout or to specialize in layout?
Do you want to go ahead with this one, Dorian?
Sure. I think, we had a meeting earlier before the pandemic, and it was talking about like, what is a layout position? It was kind of hard to kind of nail because I would say it's kind of like being a mini director in a way, because you're doing staging of the characters. You're also doing composition of the characters, and then you're adding a little bit of a cinematic flair and language. So I would say half, for animation, what we're talking about in general, and this might apply to this actually does apply to live action as well. I would say it'd be like 50% being an animator, and then 50% being a cinematographer and understanding composition and lenses and cameras and stuff like that. So it's a bit of both worlds.
That's really cool.
My own personal experience at it would make me encourage anyone who enjoys animation but isn't necessarily a great animator. And also enjoys cinematography. I mean, if you like movies and you like watching them, you might enjoy layout. Whether or not you have the talent for it is a different story. But I had thought I'd be an animator, and I animated my share of talking animals and a few bits of character here and there in different projects. But I think it was on Bolt. So my second feature of my final period of time at Disney, where I realized that the animators were doing things that never occurred to me, and I couldn't envision myself thinking of, and I wouldn't know how to make the character do. And it was sort of at that point where I said, I am not of that skill level, and I am not that person, and I'm very satisfied with where I am. It was sort of a realization that came later than it should for me, but I do enjoy animation. I can't animate. I can make curves, great camera curves, but character animation is a performance that I don't have within me and I don't have the capacity for. So I love the craft of animation, the medium. A love of movies and storytelling and an understanding of cameras and how they can affect the above aforementioned things.
It's to me, it seems like such a filmmaker's craft. Layout, like we've talked about this in other episodes, but there were times where they had, like at DreamWorks, I think for the movie Larrikins I was on, I'm sorry, I'm repeating this story for listeners, but they had the head of layout talk about it was a movie set in Australia, and they had this like Western whole look, and he did a PowerPoint presentation on like, all the different shots and like why he wanted to go with this for this sequence and like the tone of everything. And it just was so like artistic and creative and like interesting to me that it seems like, if you like that stuff, that layout is like the perfect role, like, the focal lengths and everything. I'm just repeating what you guys are saying. It's exciting.
Yeah. And it's weird because I remember as a kid, I would try to recreate the shots in the movie, and I would try to do the angles and do all that stuff. And then try to, as a little kid with your little Hot Wheels or, something like that. And we're basically, cut to, all this time later. And I'm basically doing the same thing, and I feel like I always feel so goofy, but like half the job is like, well, I think this is cool, and I was like, just do this or that, and like, then they come in and then, Iron Man comes with his fist and punches, and then we show close with the face and and it's like, it's kind of like storyboards where they pitch their ideas and you're kind of like doing that, but it's a movie that they can watch. And so like, you don't have to talk, you just explain this is what's happening. And then you can pitch your ideas as well, or how you fixed a certain problem that was there or something. And it's kind of adding that creativity, it's a hard thing to explain, because a lot of stuff is, when I see a movie, it's why is that shot cool? Mm-hmm. Why did that work and that didn't? And that was, even as a kid, I always have that in the back of my head. Mm-hmm. And the next step, if there was no computer animation or anything, would probably be, well, going and actually becoming a real cameraman or becoming a storyboard artist, where you're kind of getting that format. But this is kind of like a weird hybrid that emerged. And luckily I was there when it was starting. So I was able to, it turned into a job, which wasn't there before, so it's interesting.
And you're making great films without necessarily being able to, or having to animate or cast or direct live action actors, but you're making films. Yeah. You are creating a film without having to be excellent at all these other things.
Yeah.
Which it's showing that, to me, that means I can be valuable, even though there are great deficiencies in my skills and my ability to make an entire film on my own. Mm-hmm. I can still have a meaningful job where my creativity can show through doing something I am good at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very, very creative, because like there's sometimes where it's either boarded or it's done and they're looking at it and they're like, it's just kind of needs something else or something different. And that's why like all the artists also do alts. So they might do a shot and go, okay, this was the idea, but I also did another version of it. And they show those alts. And sometimes the editor gets one shot from us. Sometimes they get 5 shots from us or 10 shots from us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so now they have different angles they can shoot, and that can help develop the story and stuff like that. So, having that is definitely something that it's a creative process that you're adding your 2 cents to as well. And, hopefully that's kind of a story point that you're helping as well.
Yeah. I hope I hope it doesn't sound like I'm saying layout is great for people who aren't good at doing other things, because that's not what I'm trying to say. But yeah, it's great for filmmakers who want to make films.
Mm-hmm. And when I took online animation classes, I got a good, even though I was in the industry, I got a good range, and I still take classes to this day, by the way. So just to brush up on animation, because I feel like, okay, that's something you can kind of get rusty on, or I want to be better. I'm constantly doing stuff. And when you take those classes, it's people from all around the world sometimes in different countries and all that stuff like that. And the main thing I realized was it was always, I want to do final animation for movies and games. And that was it. They didn't know that there's a broad spectrum of other animation possibilities that their crafts could be used for, so there's a lot more jobs than just doing final animation just for movies and just for games or just for films. Those skills translate into other departments as well.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's why this is so valuable, honestly. Just to get it out, I think.
Yeah, I love all of that. And Rocco, I love that you came back to the point you previously made, because honestly, there's no one in any department who does not have their deficiencies in other departments, right? Like that's just the icing on the cake of working at a place where there's a bunch of different disciplines, or whether you're making a game or whatever, or a movie, is that of course you're going to have your area where you're kind of strong, and you get to hand it over to people who are better than you at these other things. And like I was a stupid little story I just told where I had to tweak the camera and it looked horrible. And I am so thankful that I have these incredible layout artists that can say, like, hey, tweak this little thing, but could you make it actually look good now, or like make it like fit in the movie? So I know you already clarified, but yeah, I just wanted to voice my support for that too, and just say like, yeah, you having deficiencies in anything certainly shouldn't. Gosh, what am I trying to say? Even just don't feel bad about it. That's the good thing about working at a place like this. It's like, everybody has those, and you kind of find where you fit in, and yeah.
Yeah, we could even say it another way and say Dorian made a short film about Raya fighting her dad and got 75 animators to animate it for him and 65 lighters to light it for him and a couple of guys to direct it for him while he was doing other stuff. You could say it that way.
Yeah.
That's, a great way to put it. Yeah.
No. Ignore that.
Actually, just kind of like impromptu question, is seeing the final result of your like layout, like once you obviously do your sequence or whatever, but once it's like all done, is that like really cool to see everything come together? Or is it, you've just seen it so many times that...
No, it's always great because it gets better once it leaves your department, and everything gets better. The animation gets better, the layout gets, the lighting, the effects, the sets, because a lot of times the sets we get aren't as detailed until later on when they actually do the textures and all that stuff. So it's always a good surprise to see it, and depending on what changes, because there's changes that can happen after I'm done with the sequence where they had to fix a few things. And I was like, oh, I don't know. They did that? Wow. That's a nice surprise, Yeah. So that's always nice to see as well, where at the last minute, the director wanted to change this or do that. And, Rocco or someone else jumped in and helped kind of make that change in there. And you're like, oh, wow. Oh, I didn't see that before. Awesome. So it's always super, super exciting, and we get jazzed when we're watching, in the depicts, in the company reels where we see your guys' rough animation. Final animation tests and stuff like that. Cause, we're dealing with stuff that, we're like, oh, okay, it's this weird character and, what's his personality? And then you guys add all that stuff. So that's really motivating so that when we're jumping on the next sequence, we're like, oh, that's really cool. Maybe we should frame for this and, add this to add a little bit more character like they're kind of doing in these animation tests. So it's all very motivational once you start looking outside your department.
Yeah. Cool. So the next question is the very juicy, any tips on breaking into layout? And we can go kind of right into like, do you guys have or could you describe the typical demo reel or portfolio that you might expect to see and how that might be structured? And
a lot of listeners asked that one.
Yeah.
It's like the number one question.
That's really because we just saw a whole bunch of demo reels.
Did.
Oh.
Okay. So you were there for a little bit.
I'm going to talk first because it actually has been a long time since I've looked at reels. So I'm going to give you this is what I imagine would be good. And then Dorian's going to tell you what is good. But for me, and this comes very specifically from my strange job. I would like to see somebody telling a story through images, because ultimately that is what we're here for, is to tell a story. And I would love to see cool shots as well, because I rely on people who can make cool shots, because I'm not one of those people. I rely on people who come up with great, huge, imaginatively cool, massive, epic shots. But I don't just want to see epic shots, because it's easy to make a standalone shot, and it's harder to get that shot to fit into a sequence without breaking rules or being confusing. The difficulties in making it work for the story. So it would be all the basic rules, matching camera angles, camera heights, good focal lengths, and having eye lines match, characters in proper positions on frame, composition, things like that. I'd love to see in a perhaps very boring sequence, but if it's thrown with a wonderful, surprising move that doesn't break anything that came before it, that would be, to me, really wonderful to see. What do you think, Dorian?
Great. That is.
I think that was Pretty good. I would say I've seen a lot of reels, but layout Previz always misinterpreted as just animation, or it's not really talked about too much in schools. They might roughly talk about it. Maybe they talk about storyboards and then final animation, but they don't really talk about kind of getting the cameras in there and that kind of language. I know right now there might be a few online classes that actually do have Previz or layout as a class now, finally, so that's a good introduction. But one of the biggest real mistakes when people apply is they have beautiful animation, but that's it. It's just one camera and it's an animation reel. And they don't understand that when it comes to layout, we want to see a complete story told cinematically. And that doesn't mean it has to be perfect lighting and perfect animation and perfect rendering. It just needs to be able to tell the story within the shots. And that's what we're looking for when we look for people. And one of the things that when I got the job at Lucasfilm, when I asked them, like, well, what kind of separated, me from the pack and stuff? And they said, oh, because, when we interviewed you, number one, you had a sequence of shots. I didn't know about the 180 line, so I might have jumped the camera, but they said it told a story, an interesting story, and it had an A, B, and C to it, and it flowed really nicely. And when they interviewed me, I actually brought the storyboards that I drew and said, oh, I was trying to figure out the shots. This is how it starts. This is how it kind of ends. And then they saw the thought process. And they saw not only was it like thinking about the sets and stuff, but I did my own storyboards and I worked it out and stuff like that. So they saw problem solving and stuff. So that's what really kind of stood out and that's what they liked. So that's kind of what I would say to anybody is if you're thinking about layout, animation's great, but also just think about telling a simple story. And, as we're talking about the process of cube viz too, like just a cube, literally if you have and that's the funny thing, which is in my head, I'm always like, they're going to fire me because, I do that process for myself, but other people can see it, or like the director recently saw it and everyone like it worked because it told the story, but it's cubes, but it had the feel and it had the energy and it had what the boards and the director were going for. And I didn't have any rig, it's very simple. So, but it told the story and it went from A to B, so that's kind of the main thing, I would say for people to kind of consider when you're thinking about layout.
Dorian, my student film was about a sphere. So you got 5 more sides than I did.
That's how advanced Dorian is.
Yeah, really.
That's 5 sides. That's great.
I'll jump in just to follow up there with, are there any big red flags when watching any layout reels or anything that like kind of clues you in right away that like this isn't probably not going to be a competitive reel? Or
yeah, I would say the number one thing is when the camera is moving and it just stops and it does a hard stop. That's the number. Like, when you're animating cameras, it's the same thing as doing regular animation where you have to make sure the curves are smooth and you have to make sure things settle correctly and stuff. And I would say one of the biggest kind of opening things was think of it as a real camera, and if you were shooting, I think we try to do that all the time, where it's like, could they physically shoot this? And I've been in situations where, the DP was there. So he's looking at the stuff I'm doing. And he's like, we can't do that. Or you're like, okay, sorry. All right. Does this work? Yeah. Okay. Good. So I would say, like, number one, look at how your cameras are moving and that they're realistic, and that they don't pop. We call it camera pops. So it's when the camera's moving and then it just stops and it does an extreme pixel lock, and that is so distracting.
Yeah.
So a lot of times good camera work is actually not being conscious of it or being aware of it.
That's absolutely true, and something to be said about those big epic shots that I would love to see on a reel is I would love to see them on a reel. I would love to not notice them in a film, because we all serve the story. And if you're thinking about what the camera's doing, unless there's no story happening at that point, and really there should be no shot where there's no story happening, you shouldn't be thinking about the camera. You should look at the screen and say, that is so cool. But you shouldn't think, oh, did you see how the camera did that? And then they did that. And oh, look how they did that. That's what you don't want. We used to have a joke. Maybe it was not a joke and more of a backhanded insult, front-handed insult, backhanded compliment. But anyway, the joke used to be that the building said animation on it. It didn't say layout on it.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm calling it a joke because I know that people don't actually feel that way and that we're making films. But really, if I had to put a name on our building besides Roy E. Disney.
That's right.
Yeah. Besides Roy E. Disney, I would put story on the building because we are all there to tell the story.
Yeah.
We're using layout to tell the story. We're using animation to tell the story. The lighting is to tell the story. And if at any moment the camera makes you think about anything except the story, then it's broken. It's not doing its job.
It's so cool. It needs to kind of almost be invisible.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to tell, like it's kind of, it's like if your job is done well, then they don't notice it.
Yeah.
In some ways. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I would just add one last thing that I see a lot on Reels. A lot of times they'll put like 2 or 3 shots in a and then jump to something else that's 2 or 3 completely different. So it's like it's an animation reel with 3 or 4 cameras, but then they jump. So just going back to telling the story of just because you have 4 or 5 cool shots, and all of a sudden it abruptly goes to a completely different situation where it's 4 or 5 cool shots and then a completely different situation. So if you're having so much random shots basically in a reel, that doesn't make a good layout reel. So going back to what Rocco was saying, it needs to have we much rather have just one simple A, B, and C story that's told correctly, with the cameras and stuff, than to have just a bunch of random shots that just look cool but have no context at all.
Yeah, I would say that a reel for layout would be very specific and not look good for any other job, unless you happen to have great animation in there coincidentally. But it would probably be a really weird reel that you wouldn't necessarily feel good about sending out because it is so specific to one certain aspect that a layperson could look at and not understand what they were looking at and why you would send that to it. You might show it to your mother and she would say, "You sure you want to send that?"
Yeah. Oh, that's really well said. A good point. Yeah. You guys are looking for very specific things, and sometimes all the polish and everything on top is not what that you're looking for. I just reworded what you guys said in like a whole other way. Please cut this out, Karen.
No, it gave us an opportunity to add things like, but also generalism is a great thing to have as a frosting on top of that cake. Sure. Because if people can do the aforementioned camera work, but they can also have nice poses. Not necessarily great animation, but good timing from poses to pose, or even if they're sliding characters, if they slide at a reasonable pace, that helps a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and timing's a huge thing. Actually, that's an interesting thing because you don't need to be. You could be great at animation or not good at animation at all. But if your timing's correct on when the camera gets there and showing the character and complementing the story, that's kind of a big thing that it's hard to explain, but it's part of the blocking or choreography of how you're staging the shots, rhythms and timings. Depending on the sequence and the mood, it can make a big difference.
Gotcha.
I wish I could remember who said it, but someone in an instructional manner said that the purpose of a shot is to take you to the next shot. And that's sort of true.
Yeah.
But to do that, the shots have to go well together. They have to make sense together. But to get to the next shot is to get you to the next shot is to get to the next shot. And by the time you get to the last shot, you've told a story.
I'm sorry. I still have more specific demo reel questions.
Sure.
That I know they're not on here, but maybe we can squeeze them in. But I'm curious, like if there's a length to shoot for, like with the animation, we often say like 1 to 2 minutes ish range, and or even if there's a student and maybe they had a very successful student film or something like that, would it ever make sense to submit like your student film or anything in that arena? I'm so curious about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies. I would say, the 2 to 3 minute mark is the average. Okay. I think that works well. But if it's a special case where you did have a student film, that might be okay, But I would say, as apart from the final rendered student film, if you're applying for layout, we also want to see the rough stuff, the first pass you did. We want to see the grayscale of how you got from layout to there. And some of the good reels I've seen, they'll show the storyboard or they will show the layout in the corner, grayscale.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
And then they would show the final in the top corner. So the rough pass of how they were laying out the cameras, it's just play blast, no fancy lighting or anything. But, in the corner, we can compare the final to how they were doing it initially.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And if they have storyboards, that's great. They can add that as well. But we would rather just see how they were working in the computer and how they got to the final.
Super interesting.
That's great.
And it doesn't have to, let's say it's a 10-minute movie that they did or something. Again, rule of thumb, try to keep it, around 3 to 5 minutes.
Gotcha.
So take the best part of that movie that you felt showed off the layout and just compress it. And, again, that's going to be a number of shots put together in a sequence. You don't need to tell the whole story. Just for that little beat was fine.
Got it.
Yeah, that is a good point. I would have said that sure, you can tell from a film, but to your point, if somebody puts up a film on their reel and it's an entire 10-minute film, I would feel bad turning it off. But I don't have 10 minutes to spare. So choosing a selection from that film would be great. And if they did the entire thing themselves, I would be comfortable not seeing specific layout. But if it was a collaborative project,
that makes sense.
It would be great to see what they had done before other people added to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great. So our next question, this one is from several listeners, and multiple people wrote in to say or to ask, are there any particular resources like books, sites, courses, schools, etc., that you believe were a help to you while you were kind of on your journey or that you look to now? And then kind of something that goes hand in hand with that, just general tips about how to practice layout or get better at it as a student.
My education was also strange because my dad was the head of the directing department at CalArts for 25 years.
Wow.
So I learned a lot of stuff just from him talking. I don't know how to necessarily put that into words.
Sure. Yeah.
So I know we used to say everybody had a copy of the 5 C's of cinematography on their desk.
Yeah.
Or shot by shot.
I've never made it all the way through the 5 C's of cinematography. And I don't know if I've ever made it all the way through shot by shot, but I've got a lot of film books sitting around that my dad gave me that I've never read all of either. So it's an amalgam of things. And I think that might be just unique to my experience that maybe isn't worthwhile for the show. But.
Well, those two things I didn't know those books off the top of my head. So that alone is valuable. And sorry, go ahead, Dory.
No. Yeah. So, those are good to read about. Those books actually just explain the basic cinematic rules. And, we've mentioned the 180 rule, and the different lenses and different compositions on a character. There's tangents that we try to avoid. If you're doing a close-up, there's a very good close-up, there's a medium close-up, and then there's a wide close-up, and then there's wide shots, medium shots. So all that kind of stuff, I kind of picked up while I was working, and depending on the director or the supervisor, they would kind of tell you, oh, well, do it like this or do it like that. But those books, when I got those books, it did go, oh, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
That's a great way to put it. I learned a lot on the job as well. Again, being hired in early CG, they just wanted anybody that could push a mouse and click a keyboard. But I learned a lot on the job. And, I remember the first time a director talked about attention in the frame. They said, can you just pull that away, the character's head away from the edge of frame or away from this object, because there's just a weird tension there because the head and the object were too close. And I never heard the word used in that way before. And it made such perfect sense to me because my eye kept being drawn to this tension in the frame that was between these two objects. And it was just a magnet between the objects drawing my eye to it. And it's experiences like that they're just things you never forget. And, but they all happened on the job. Really.
Yeah, and I would say one of the new things that's come out was the masterclass that's online. Yeah. So there you can get really, there's a Ron Howard one I watched. I know there's definitely some cinematography ones that the DPs go into how they compose shots and how they do stuff. So that's pretty valuable effort. And I know there's got to be at least a few other books. Look into cinematography. Google that and see if whatever videos you can find, making ofs. That'll give you a good insight for that. And just personally, I would. The ILM Into the Digital Realm book. I know for me that in high school, that was a really good introduction into the industry and how things work and stuff like that. And of course, The Illusion of Life, that's the classic, Disney book, which I didn't know about until, college when someone mentioned it. And it was just like, what is that? And I read it and I was like, oh my God, this explains everything. And then just pay attention to films. I think that's the biggest thing. Watch a lot of films and look at how they shoot shots and look at different moments and what shots and what lenses they're using for those moments, and when they do a close-up, why is the background so blurry? That's a story point that's in there. Why did they suddenly go to a wide shot? Why did they go medium? So that stuff, even as a kid, I would rewind the tape when we had VHS tapes and I would watch sequences over and over. And then that's what kind of got me thinking of just like, to this day, I'll if I watch a movie, I'll watch it like 5 times, just not all at once, but, over a course of a time, like a few years when the movie came out, I realized like, I probably watched it like 3 or 4 times, or as I work, I'll have a movie that I'm watching. And if there is, let's say, a sequence I'm working on, I'll still go into the catalog of films that I think would help me get some good reference for what the movie or the shot needs for this sequence and this and that. So, just like going into a dictionary and looking for words, if you're a writer, I'll go to movies and look for shots and look for different situations. And a lot of times it's not the actual shot that I remember, but it's maybe a moment that gave me tension, or maybe a sad moment or something. And I go, how'd they do that? And then I'll rewatch that sequence and see how they did it. And by the way, everybody does that. Directors do that. Some of the biggest name directors, they're looking at old films and they're, using that as well as reference for their current films.
Yeah. So when we were working on Encanto, we were talking about a bit of the film, and one of the directors said, "Oh yeah, it shouldn't be like that scene in Lord of the Rings." I was just watching that the other day, and I thought, we are in crunch on a feature film. How do you have time to watch even the most edited Lord of the Rings film?
That's hilarious.
It's not so funny. Dorian, I'm sorry, I'm turning into an interviewer now.
This makes it nice for us.
We use we have a lot of live action folk in our department. A lot who came over from DreamQuest when Disney bought that company. And they have a lot of real world camera skills. Do you think that is very important for people coming into the studio? Or do you think as long as they have a rudimentary understanding of f-stops and focal lengths and what they mean?
Yeah, it always helps.
Okay.
It always helps. And even if you're a photographer, because you're doing compositions and you're doing stuff. But there's a certain dance, I would say, of moving the camera and knowing how the camera moves and stuff like that. And like when I started, I didn't know anything about cameras. I took a photography class in high school. That's about as much as I had. But I somehow, because my brain TiVo'd so many movies and sequences, I somehow had this kind of natural instinct of where to put the camera and what felt right and what didn't feel right. And those feelings eventually translated into technical aspects of the thirds of the camera, the 180 rule, this and that. And even though it wasn't 100% correct, at least it was a good foundation because I paid attention to how movies were shot, that it gave me a good instinct of where to put the camera given the scene. And, for the longest time, that's kind of just how I worked. And then later I picked up lenses and, f-stops and, stuff like that. But, I think as long as if you got a good instinct for compositions, and if you're a fan of cinema and storytelling in shots, that's probably the biggest advantage, because as long as you have that interest and you narrowed it down, then it's just learning from there on.
It seems like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a ton of parallels with story, because a lot of what you guys are saying with composition, the rule of thirds, 180-degree rule, like watch cinema, that's like definitely what story artists do too. So it just seems, it's so interesting to me.
Yeah, and there's been story artists who've come from layout, who actually went at DreamWorks. There was a couple people who applied for storyboarding and became storyboard artists, because they had a very good drawing skill. And, right now, personally, I'm working on my drawings right now. And
so cool.
It's helpful to know how to draw too, because, when you're explaining something to someone, I can just draw it real quick and give a rough idea of the composition while we're having the meeting and see, is that what you're going for, or this? Or if I'm supervising, explaining something to the artist, the first thing I do is I get a notepad and I just start doing little storyboards of, this is the close-up of the hand we should do, and little stuff like that. So there is a bit of storyboard in there, but I would love to go down that path one day, and, just for myself, but it's always handy to kind of have that idea.
Super cool.
There's a lot of material on YouTube related to breaking down films. Every Frame of Painting, though now defunct,
it's the best.
Is terrific. And even the works that are not specifically about camera and staging have, I think, value, because as the what do we call them? YouTubers?
I think so.
Influencers.
Well,
yeah, you're right. I don't think any of us are cool enough to know exactly how so whatever you want to call them.
As I don't know, editorial documentary filmmaker is saying in their short work.
That's it.
While they're displaying these other people's work, you're seeing a section of a film and you're looking at it through a different context. You're not wrapped up in the movie. You haven't been watching it for an hour and a half. You're just seeing a section of it, and somebody is talking about something while you're looking at it, but it lets you look at it in a different way, and you're thinking different things while you look at it. And I think even if it's specifically not about cinematography, you will probably start to notice things and pull things from those little snippets. But Every Frame of Painting does have a lot about cinematography, and Nerd Writer as well does some good stuff.
Yeah.
Those are two that come to mind. But the internet is such a wonderful resource.
It's huge. And we again, if you don't have the movie available on, iTunes or Blu-ray or whatever, going to the internet, I remember one time on Avengers, it was helpful because someone did every single time Iron Man shot his, used his weapons, and it was a 10-minute compilation of every single Marvel film. And I was just like, thank you, awesome, or all the Hulk shots from every movie cut together, just
perfect.
Thank you, internet. Yeah. I would have had to scour through all these DVDs and all this stuff to try to look for reference for that stuff. But the interesting thing for that is when I work on a sequence, when I'm using reference or something like that, a lot of times it's with a movie that has absolutely nothing to do with the sequence I'm working on. It's you're like, well, you're working on this part here, which is dramatic and stuff like that. And it's like, well, if it's Raya, I'm going to look for, Asian cinema or Kung Fu or, something like that. And then, but there was a part of Buckaroo Banzai that has absolutely, or a comedy or, nothing to do with the scene, But in my weird way of thinking, it went to that. And, even though it has nothing to do with it. And that way I wasn't copying that type of cliche style or storytelling, but I was using something else that was, you wouldn't really normally use for that situation that give you more interesting camera angles. Mm-hmm. So every once in a while, like that will happen. Or like, just those kind of references will sometimes just pop up. So, just because they do a quiet scene in, a very emotional part of the movie doesn't mean you have to go to a quiet scene and only serious, dramatic, emotional parts. Maybe it was a comedy that all of a sudden like the everything stopped because of this emotional moment in the comedy. And that's what brought the audience to tears or something, and so you can mess around with different genres,
That's where that TiVo comes in handy and you're always know.
Like if you're working on a space movie with space stuff, doesn't mean that, I use a lot of Westerns actually to look at space things and how they're shooting stuff. Because, if you just went to only space movies, it's going to be the same shot over and over and over. So you're always kind of looking for something interesting.
So cool.
Gosh, I'm going to take that myself and put it in my pocket for animation references. I do feel like sometimes we get a little too granular about like, okay, looking for reference for this thing. It has to be, I have a horse jumping over this hedge. Okay, I'm going to look up the dressage competition for this and have a hedge of a similar length. I don't know. That's a ridiculous example, but yeah, you're right. That I just love that. There can be these overlaps in unexpected places, maybe. And
I even like really what people, my taste in movies is pretty drastic, so even what someone's like, oh, that movie was absolutely horrible, I try to find the little light in there and just go, but look, they did this sequence really well and it was so cool,
that's
for
awesome.
something. So to me, like there's never like a really bad film. It's just like, it's not as good as the other one or this, but I always think that they always have different strengths and stuff like that. So I'll watch a really bad film several times and go, this is great. I don't know what it's talking about. Just like, because on a technical aspect, they did some really good stuff in here. The story's not good, but they did some really cool stuff,
That's awesome. I love that.
It's a good reminder not to think of movies as like binary. This is good or this is bad. It's like there's always something you can get from it. So
yeah, there's always something you can learn,
So moving on to question 5, we have the very exciting, what's your least favorite part of your job? And I think as animators, we're all like especially curious to know too, like if you guys have any department pet peeves, like do we as animators ever do anything that drives you crazy or anything like that? We're very curious.
No, it's a good question because I don't think, any department, the pet peeves are usually, it's part of the process actually, because like storyboards, we're going over and over and trying to figure out the sequence. So, I guess the biggest things is, when you're working on something and then it completely gets reboarded and it's a completely different sequence. But that's not something that's annoying because that's part of the process. Because I always feel like our job is basically to go through that process and, redo and, reinvent everything and try to get everything together so that other people down the road don't have to deal with these issues and they have something final. So the more we're able to get it done, the more people, it's easier for them, department pet peeves, it's really hard because changing stuff is part of our job, and changes that come up. So, when you're a student and you go to being a professional, the big difference is, if you're working on something, they might take it away from you because they did their story changes or something and stuff like that. But just, it's the part of the process and just accept it and move on. But I think that'd probably be the number one thing of someone who is just starting. That's just like, well, I worked on that for, 2 weeks and now it's cut or it's out the window or something. It's like, yeah, it hurts the first couple times, but it's part of the process, and if they didn't do that, they kind of wouldn't have went further with it and kind of gotten to that, final story aspect of it if they didn't kind of go through the process of figuring it out, so. All right. Well, there is something that's not specific to anything, but it always happens. And it doesn't matter if it's live action or animation or anything. And I nicknamed it zombie shots. And they're basically shots that just won't die.
Really?
It doesn't, no matter what movie you're on or anything like that, there's always a zombie shot in that film where the poor artist who is on it has to redo that shot 5, 10, 12 times just because it's not quite right. Or, you know what, there are some story changes and now it's this. And it's not like a big action. It's usually not the action sequences, actually. It's usually some of the more tender moments or something where they're really trying to nail the feeling of the shot or something. But it's going to happen. But you can't predict which shot it's going to be. And you're always surprised when it ends up being that shot. So the zombie shots are kind of one of those things that it's just like it always happens, and it's just and the sequence is done, but that one shot just keeps coming back and coming back because let's do a little push in, and then you do the push in. Let's actually pull out this. Can we maybe just go sideways like we're tracking her, and then you do that? Actually, can we go the other way? Can we do a top down? And it's just like you're doing all these options, and the shot just won't go. And finally, when it's done, you're like, thank God. Okay, all right, let's move on. And other times, you're working on another sequence, but you're still going back to that zombie shot.
That is hilarious
and well put.
Zombie shots.
Totally happens for animators too. Like 1,000%. Yeah, it's so funny you said that because it's just so.
I think zombie shots are for pretty much any department. I think at some point they might run into those shots no matter what you do.
For me, the least favorite part of my job is screwing up. I just don't like making mistakes, and those mistakes could be anything. I really hate when I screw up communication, when I misunderstand a director, or you probably understand this as well, when you have an idea and you would like to pursue it and you ask about it and the person you just asked did not understand what you said.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And says, no, I don't think so. And if you had just said it better or more clearly, you would be continuing the conversation. But now you've been shut down and you can't say, I'm sorry, no, I meant this. And so you can't belabor the point that you've just failed to make. Yeah. I hate making mistakes of communication.
Oh, man. That's a good one.
That is a good one.
But since it's what you were all dying for.
Yes.
The things I hate about working with animators.
Yes.
For the listeners, I work in the scene files of almost all the animators at Disney Animation, if not all of them.
Yes, this is what we want. This is what we want to get to.
So that's 100 different workflows to deal with. Plus the workflows of the 30 or so layout artists we've got that I try to stay apprised of in case I need to use their work to integrate.
Gotcha.
But the things in there that are pet peeves, we'll start with an accident. We've got the baked camera. We've got a rigged camera, and then that rig gets baked down to what gets rendered. And by baked, a key on every frame, uneditable baked camera. There are some animators that have an amazing skill of moving the unmovable camera. I don't know how, and I don't know that they know how, and I don't know that they do it intentionally. But but the baked camera sometimes gets moved in a scene, and it is really, really difficult to get that data back out into something that can be rendered because there are no extractions done on the baked camera. It's a very technical thing I'm about to dive into, but you can't, we don't publish the baked camera. It just exists on disk. So we've got to take a rig and track it back to that baked camera to get that move out. and it's awkward, but
Yeah.
I think it's mostly unintentional. I don't like anim layers when they're used on the camera.
That certainly makes sense.
And that also comes down to how our cameras get extracted, because those layers on Publish will get baked down into a key on every frame, which makes it really hard to edit. But it also comes down to the fact that I've never been good with animation layers, and jumping into somebody else's file and trying to figure out how they've set up their animation layers is really
That makes sense.
is hard to decipher for me.
Yeah.
So I don't enjoy that.
Yeah, that's certainly understandable.
Another unfortunate thing is when I tweak a camera too early. There's a balance I need to find for adjusting a camera to the animation, but I want to do it before the animators, or after the animator's done kind of fudging things around. Sometimes if the paint is too wet, I'll use the camera to reposition the character in screen or to adjust an eye line or something, thinking, okay, I've got this. I'm hitting it early. I'm not going to screw up their animation. It'll blend in with the rest of the sequence. It'll be perfect. But I think perhaps subconsciously they'll sort of be working back towards the reference that they had or the angle they instinctively went to in the first place.
Interesting. Yeah.
And they'll move back towards what they had because they're still fleshing out the performance and there's still lots of work to do.
They like counter what you did.
And so they counter what I do.
Yeah.
And then I can't necessarily go back in and do it again because now the camera's getting way off of where it ought to be, because we're starting to dance around the room together.
Yeah.
So sometimes I consider it a mistake on my part, but I've done it too early, and sometimes I just need to jump into the animator's file and say, when you close this file, let me know. I'm going to jump in, move everything to a different place, and then give you the file in the morning, because it's better for me to sort it out than try and either leave the camera in the wrong place, leave the shot miscomposed, or ask you to do these changes for me.
And if you're hearing sirens in the background, audience, it's because these tips are so fresh that they're so fire that they're just going to come.
I was going to say, because Garrett lives in such a tough town, tough neighborhood around
here.
Yeah.
Sorry, not to put down any of your points. I was just like, they're going to hear this.
So informative and educational.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Can I also say some things that I like for animators to do?
Yeah.
No, we're not as... Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier if I liked it when an animator says, I've changed the camera. Just so you know, I love that because it lets me know to pay extra attention and make sure that the sequence still works. And for a while, I was very protective of the layout cameras. Early on, my first couple films as camera polisher, and I would try and drive things to be like the layout cameras were. But I learned that was not necessarily the way to do it, because it's a fluid process. Things change. And now it's so much easier just to ask myself the question, is it messing up anything we set up that needs to be there? Does it work?
Yeah.
And if it works and doesn't mess anything up, it's the perfect camera. It doesn't matter if it's different. So I love when animators let me know that, just so I can make those calculations in my head and those comparisons real quickly and not have to worry about it, not have to try and figure it out. And also, if there were 5 other shots that were the same as that one, then I can decide, do we change those 5 others that maybe haven't been animated yet? Or do we change this one that just got approved?
Yeah,
Sure.
It's so helpful to hear, all the mental calculus that you're doing so quickly on the fly in those meetings.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to find the least impactful way to get the film on track or keep it moving. I enjoy that. I enjoy when animators come up with a better camera than I come up with. It's always... it's humbling when somebody who doesn't do your job for a living does your job better than you did your job when you had that sequence in layout.
To be fair, it's usually because they're just taking what you've done and like pushing a curve like one, like they're building off of what you did.
Perhaps, but sometimes it's a whole new idea. And sometimes I say, man, I didn't see that. And that is awesome. And I'm glad you thought of it. And I'm trying to figure out a way I can take credit for it. But yeah, tell my boss I did this thing. Awesome. So those are things I love, and that goes hand in hand with the other thing, which is if you're going to do that, let me know that you did. Or especially the animators that come to me early and say, I'm thinking of doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Then they ask me the question, does this mess anything up? Does it still work? And the earlier that information comes through, the earlier we can keep that shot moving.
That collaboration's awesome.
Yeah.
Gotta say, I just think that the way it happens here, having you there, for Garrett and I coming from other studios, like it's so great. And I love it. And I think pretty much everybody does. I haven't talked to anybody who's like, oh, Rocco's in here. That has never been the case. And for me, I mean, aside from, yes, it's more efficient, we can keep going and everything, that's all amazing. I just love when all of a sudden you'll speak up and you get a little bit of a higher level thing where it's like, you'll say, oh, well, the purpose of this shot is this, or with the camera we're trying to sell this, and I'm like, oh my god, it wasn't even on my radar. So yeah, I don't know why I even started this other than to say like it's fantastic. I love the way it is, and I love having you in there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Thank you. I still feel like you are letting me into your department every time I show up in dailies, and I appreciate your tolerance.
Oh man, yeah. It's great. It really is. Yeah. I feel like we're the ones lucking out with it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's silly to even ask this at this point because we've talked about so many cool things about your job. But officially, our number 6 question in this series is: what are your favorite parts about your job?
One of the biggest things is actually just coming up with ideas and coming up with. To this day, I'm still amazed that people listen. Or when they're willing to take a chance on something, because we are kind of sometimes taking the first stab at things, or trying to create a cinematic language or an idea or something, and sometimes you got to create new ideas, and that the start of that creation of getting the sequence and getting those ideas, and then riffing with the directors and the editors and trying to figure out how we can make this, good, or take it to another level, or what the mood is. I think that's, for me, that coming up with everything and being part of that creative vibe, and sometimes there's a writer involved, but being with the writer, director, editor, and just being there and, creating the movie, and sometimes, storyboard people, of course, but, just kind of, it's the first stab at, you're going from, 2D drawings, and then it's the first real 3D stab at it. And, like the stuff you're doing is basically going to ripple down the pipeline, and, that one shot you did, or that one idea you might have just come up with or something, in a year from now, it'll be in the movie, so that's always kind of really shocked me. And it's still something that just that idea or that creative inspiration or something can basically just keep going all the way down. That's one of the things that kind of really motivates me, of just like working on a sequence. You think it's cool, and then you're hoping that in a year from now, people think it's cool too. But learning, working with the different departments, and learning from what the director's ideas are, and then our head of layout, he does an outline, learning what mood he's going for, and it's this type of setting or this type of feeling and stuff like that. And then I think just going back to working with the departments, the one thing that I really like that they do at Disney is actually they encourage people to talk to each other. So if you're working with an animator or a modeler or something, it's not like, oh, you're another department, I don't, it's like, oh, well, just go talk to him. He's right there, and everyone's really open to talking to different departments, and they encourage that, which at some other studios they might not, So that was one of the really pleasant things I found out when I came to Disney, was like, oh wow, okay, they want us to tackle our own problems and talk to the right people, and you get stuff done faster, and you get to know what they're dealing with and stuff like that. So learning, that type of stuff is another big inspiration too, is when you get to peek into the other departments and see what they're working on. And that kind of motivates you as well. So that whole but that's all part of that creativity bubble that forms, and it's hard to explain, but that's kind of what gets me up in the morning and keeps me motivated. Just like, oh man, we're creating something, Awesome. It's just really cool, and then at the end it's pencils down, and then you have to jump on to the next project, and hopefully, you got all your ideas and your last calls and everything in before you had to stop working on it, because we can't redo it,
Right.
So it's exciting. Yeah. It's a race, but it's also a creative race.
I've mentioned that my art is a series of reduction of criticisms. So it's problem solving. I see the things that I don't like in shots as problems that need to be overcome. And my favorite part of the job is overcoming particularly difficult problems, whether that's in the layout process of, we have to get this character around the room. We've got to do these shots without crossing the line of action. But it's very difficult. There's always a way. It's just cracking that nut to find the right sequence of shots to get the camera on the other side of the character. I love it when it's a simple thing, like just a head turn at the right time to take you to something else, to take you back. When you can throw the camera around by the action that's happening in the frame. I like simple, elegant problem solving is the most favorite. When the directors are struggling to approve a shot in animation dailies, and their notes are a little unfocused, and they're trying to feel out something that doesn't actually seem to be related to the animation. I really love it when we can get that with the camera. We can solve that with just tweaking the camera in some way, and get that shot approved, which maybe should have been approved already, but was just missing that something, and it wasn't the animator's work at all. It was something about the camera that needed to be taken care of. I love it when those solutions pop up.
We love that too, I think.
But what Dorian said about the collaboration and the community and the building full of people who are insanely talented and all working on the same thing as you it's really outstanding.
Yeah.
And it may just be a misperception on my part, but I feel like Disney is a studio that is willing to commit a little extra time and money, because our movies are definitely not cheap, to allow us to take our craft to the next level. Again, it's really the only feature animation studio I've worked at, so they could all be like that. Netflix might be paying 3 times as much money to make their movies, and you've only raised your craft by 5 levels? We're going 7. I don't know, but I feel like Disney is a place where you really are encouraged to take the time to get your work to the highest level it can be, while still getting the film made.
Sure. Yeah.
Within reason.
Yeah.
And I just would add the people. That's huge. Like, I just feel really lucky that everyone I've met at the studio, they're just like the nicest people in the world. I mean, I don't think, I've walked in going, oh, I don't want to talk to that guy. Or, something like that. You walk in and people are just really happy to just talk with you and, stuff like that. And you're not bugging them and, stuff. So it just, I've always felt really lucky that I've always been able to work, luckily, I mean, in the broadness of my career for the most part. I mean, I can't even think of anybody that I was just like, oh my gosh, that scared me, or, that was a horrible thing. It's just like, everyone's just been really cool. And I think if you had that friendly vibe and you're not looking for trouble and stuff, people are just going to be friendly, but everyone's just so nice and just really cool. And yeah, the people are, it's great. Yeah. It's really cool being with fellow artists, I would say.
The lack of ego. It's just really nice.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to our next section, which is listener questions. Very, very exciting part where basically a little while back, we put out a call on social media for questions. And as always, our listeners delivered and actually took a bunch of time to send us a bunch of questions. So we're super, super excited to get to this today. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer absolutely all of the questions, but we hope that most questions will have been answered kind of throughout the episode. And I guess moving forward, what we'll do is we'll have you guys alternate questions and answers in the interest of time. But obviously, please feel free to chime in wherever, if anything pops up organically that you'd like to discuss. Okay, so to begin, from Instagram handle A Cup of Whimsy, can layouts be like storyboards, or are they really detailed and fleshed out?
Rocco.
I think layouts can be like storyboards. Well, the answer to this question is yes. They can be like storyboards if you can convey what needs to be conveyed with just a static frame or minimal frame. But if you've got characters moving across frame, or going somewhere, or the camera's moving, then you really do need to flesh that out, because you're also informing the editor's timing, and the animators are going to need those moving cameras. So yes, but if it needs more, it needs more.
Yeah, I'll just add to that on the live action side. Absolutely, especially when you don't have storyboards and you literally just have a script, and you're kind of sitting there having to thumbnail it yourself and come up with the shots and edit it and put music to it and flesh something out. So that's definitely happened on a lot of occasions. So yeah, that could be basically hand in hand, not because we want to, just because of the necessity of the situation.
Sure. So another question from at Lemlai. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to say that. Lemlaya? Thank you so much for the question. It's, how much freedom do you have when transferring the 2D storyboards into 3D space?
Well, we have as much as the director gives us, or the directors give us. Generally, when we are issued sequences, we like to find out, first off, did the director board it themselves?
That's a good point.
Very important.
If they did,
That's huge.
it's huge. Yeah. Are there any shots that they are really attached to?
Sure. Gotcha.
And well, really, it's just those two. Often in the story process, the story artists will just draw something because they need a board to fill that space. I've heard this said by a story artist, so I'm not just making words, but they just need a board to fill a space. So they'll draw something, and there's really no value to it except that it's a placeholder, or it's occupying space in their beats. But also, even if you disregard that, because of our evolving story process and our editing process, the editors may be pulling old boards because they just need something to fill a beat, or the board artist may not have had time to go back and reboard an entire sequence, just a short segment to get the story changes worked in. So there may be boards that really have nothing to do with what they need to get across. They're just still there, sort of the legacy boards. And if you know the difference between what's really important to the directors, what is really important in telling the story, and what is just a rough sketch, then it's really easy to navigate the pathway, I think.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have to make sure it tells the story. And if it doesn't tell the story, once you get it in a 3D space, then it just has to change because it's ineffective. So I say you have a lot of freedom as long as you have a good reason to do it.
That's awesome.
Nailed it.
That's great.
Thank you.
Perfect.
So this next question from, again, at Peter Kirkvliet or Peter K. Erkvliet, not sure. But thank you, Peter. Are there any tricks or tips or tricks for workflows on basically how to work quickly and to get different alternate versions in front of a director?
Yeah, I would say as long as you got the idea of the shot, that's all you need to do. So there's some situations where let's say it's 4 or 5 shots, and in one of the shots, the character just needs to be in a certain position. You don't need to animate it, so sometimes you can spend more time over animating something that really doesn't need to be animated. So I would say I've seen some really good shots where when I actually opened up the scene file and looked at it, it was just a pose that slid into the right spot at the right time. Not even animated, just the translates on it. So, but it worked really well because the camera was at the right angle and it told the story that it needed for that shot. So, stuff like that, I say that's like the pro achievements that get unlocked where less is more, and it gives you more time to kind of work on the other shots that might need more work. And I would say the second thing to the question as far as alts in front of the director, we do alts all the time, but one of the common mistakes or the common things I see sometimes is when someone does an alt for a camera and there's like 5 different alts, but they're all just a little, one camera's going maybe a little higher at the end. But if you play them in order and you show it to a person, they can't tell the difference. So I always say, if you're doing an alt, go for it. Make sure that every shot is drastically different than the other, or has a very, if you show it to someone and like, these are my 3 alts, they should immediately be able to recognize those as different alts. If you're just tweaking it, that's kind of just you and your brain processing it and just going, well, see at the end how it slowed down just a hair, as opposed to the last shot where it just slowed down. It looks like the exact same shot. Right? So, I did that all the time. So that's one of the things where I just ended up just going, if it's slightly different, then I'll just choose the best shot and delete the alt version. And I want to make sure every shot that I deliver as an alt is drastically different. And that helps the editor as well.
That's a good way to put it. Alt oversaturation is definitely a thing. There's certain bookkeeping things that may be specific to our process, which is if you're sending an alt of a sequence to editorial, it's nice if all the shots that match are all the same alt designation. So we use alt A, alt B, alt C, alt D. So if all your alt Ds go together and they're different from all your alt Bs for a sequence, then it makes it easier for the editor to know all the Bs are this version, all the Cs are this version.
That makes sense.
But again, that's specific to our workflow. I would also, just to back up what Dorian said, when I do different camera versions for directors, if they say, we want a camera that does this, if they're actually making a request of me for a camera change in animation, I want to make sure we don't go round and round, because we only get the directors periodically, and it's hard to find time to show otherwise. And that animator will be waiting for that camera unless they've got something else to do. So I try to give them, I show them the version that we had originally, show them a light version and an extreme version.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll skip the light version and do a medium version. But I always try to give them one that's too much.
Okay. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But so they have the reference of what they saw. They have one that I think is too far. And then they have something that seems like
totally makes sense.
The 2 options for the better point. And sometimes they go for the too far. But it's, like you said, dive in and make it different. And I try and make that one so different that they're not going to like it.
Yeah. I think you brought up a really good rule of thumb, which is I always try to do the board pass first.
Yeah.
Because that's what they last saw. And then I'll go in and do my alt versions or my combined shots and stuff, just in case, even though we may not show it because it flows better from what I did. I still kind of do it in there and still have it in there just in case they go, wait, what was that version in the board? And then we go, oh, we got it right here. And then they can see, oh, this is why it didn't work. Or maybe they like it and they go, you know what? We actually really did like it. Let's stick to that. But I always try to do the pass that they gave us first, and then I'll start going on the crazy train.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes doing the boards can inform you of what your process should be.
Yeah.
Super cool. Actually, on a technical level, would that mean like having multiple cameras of the same shot in the scene, or would you have separate scenes? I'm just curious about that.
It's usually that, yeah.
Multiple cameras.
So imagine if you're on a set and there's an actor and you have one camera. Now imagine you have 5 cameras.
Got it.
On the same exact situation. So we'll have, if you open up any one of our scene files, sometimes you'll see like a character position and just this like blob of cameras just around it. What is this? Yeah. Because it's, it's covering as many angles as we can or something. You'll find one way up in the sky or something. But it's because we're trying to be as efficient as possible.
Got it.
Interesting.
Cool.
So a couple of students reached out to us and seem to have the misconception that layout is a stepping stone to animation. Do you guys have an opinion on that idea or care to comment? We get that this kind of is a sensitive, or could be a sensitive question. Saucy question.
I definitely have an opinion on it. I think if you are going into layout anticipating to transition into animation, you're not going to be a very good layout artist, or you're not going to be a very good transitioner, because you don't have time to do both. You don't have time to animate your layouts well enough to impress the animation department. If you're going into layout and you also like animation, it's hard to argue with somebody who likes both things and might like to try the other. But I can say that if I was given the choice of hiring somebody who wanted to work in layout on their way to animation versus somebody who was truly passionate about layout, I would probably hire the person who was passionate about layout,
Of course, yeah, sure.
even if they might not be as excellent an artist as the one who wants to go in animation, because they're going to be with us longer. They're going to grow. They're going to evolve, and they're going to stay. Or at least I hope they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say it's good to figure that out when you're a student or when you're learning the craft. So as you're working on your short or doing something, you kind of realize, I like doing this better, or I like doing that better. And, one of the things I like is the speed that we work and the roughness of what we're working. It's like sketching, as opposed to like when you go in animation, you're spending a lot of time on one shot and perfecting that shot. And that's a craft. And it takes patience, and it's a little bit of a different mindset when it's not one shot. You got to do, 20 shots by the end of the week, and it's got to be correct and flow nice. And, it's a different type of way of thinking. So it's good to figure that out before you go in. But, if there's nothing wrong with doing it and then all of a sudden you change your mind, or, I've seen layout go into storyboards. I've known some final animators who became layout artists just because they fell in love with the camera and doing stuff. So they became, they're able to balance that. It's rare, but it does happen. But yeah, try to, if you're just like, I'm just doing this temporary so I can, do this or do that. It could just end up getting mediocre work, because you're trying to take advantage of a situation to do something else. So yeah, that's what Rocco was saying there, that you got to be careful on that as well.
I just imagine they do one shot and it's just like really well animated or something, but then they had like 20 shots due and you're like, where are your other shots?
Right.
Like, what are you doing?
And that those situations have happened in the past where someone who really wanted to be an animator got into doing previs or layout, and then the camera was not moving at all. And it was taking them, 4 days to do one shot. And it's just like, meanwhile, the guy who was literally out of school is next to him doing 3 shots a day and, not focusing on the animation much, just kind of focusing on the cameras and getting the job done, so
Yeah.
it depends. And like anything else, going in and out of different job positions is very tricky, but if you do it, I say, make sure you're doing it on your off time, not on company time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Definitely. Actually, you just touched on this a little bit. But the next question is, have you ever met folks who transitioned from animation to layout? And we actually got a specific question from at Tristan.Bossy, who asks, what's the best way to move from character anim to layout?
Oh yeah. No, I know a couple final animators from ILM and Sony and stuff who've gone into layout. And I know one from Disney Animation as well. But it is possible. And they're really good, by the way. Like, it's not just they just went, I'm going to put a camera here. Like, they're students of film, and when you talk to them, it's very clear that they watch a lot of film, they study film, they study camera angles, but they've always had that passion. They just, at the time, there was no Previz at the time, or they kind of were animators and saw people were doing cameras, and they got interested and started trying to volunteer to help out, and stuff like that. So it is possible, but it is kind of rare too.
I would say everything Dorian said about what he would like to see on a reel would be things they could focus on. And all the tips for becoming a layout artist certainly would apply. But also I would say as an animator, they would have a unique opportunity if they had free time. Because they've got a character that is performing.
Yeah.
And they can come at it the other way from what we do, which is we do some rough animation in front of cameras. But if you've got animation, you can just throw cameras on that. You've got an actor now who's acting. And you can put all the cameras you want on that actor. And you can start playing with things and finding out what looks good and making a story out of that animation that you've got. So the thing you are experienced at can become a strength in helping you build the skills you need to do layout, because you've got a subject.
Yeah, totally.
It's really cool.
That's great.
I would also say, I don't know if this works if this exists at other studios, but at Disney, we've had animators help us with doing Previz blocking. And I'd say that would be a great transitional position.
Yeah.
Get into that, because often those animators not only do the blocking, but they also help with cameras and help sort things out. There's just a greater collaboration in that position. And I think that would be a great way to learn more about the intricacies of layout and perhaps see if you're a fit. The other place you could do it is if you're in a hired position as an animator is your toolkits or tests.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a good place to stretch and put something together that tells a little story, because you do have to figure out those characters, and you do have to have them do something. And in a toolkit, you tend to have a little bit of freedom.
Yeah.
Going back to the student aspect of it, if you're studying animation right now and you're like, maybe might be interested in layout, take a class in layout. Do it on the off time. And now that there's online classes, there's some Previz classes out there that teach that. So that's a good way to, at night, or, as an alternate, to try out layout and see if that's for you and if you really like it. And want to go down that route.
It's a really great point.
Definitely.
Yeah. So our next question is from at Rachel_0310_1996. Thank you, Rachel. What is the most misunderstood aspect of layout you would like to share?
That would be that layout is a stepping stone to animation.
There you go. It's lit.
I had a feeling.
Now, that is a good question. Do you have anything off the top of your head, Dorian?
That is tough. I would say the most misunderstood thing is the fact that a lot of people don't know what it is, or it's not talked about, as part of the process. That is a tough thing.
Yeah, I guess I would say this may not be true presently, but I do feel like there was a misconception in early CG that layout was really just assembling the assets and putting them into a file that matched the storyboards.
That makes sense. Yeah.
That it was just a misunderstanding of all the effort that went into it that was not technical but artistic.
I'd say probably like because the layout title comes from 2D days as well. So and 2D is completely different layout than what you're doing in 3D.
Yeah.
In 3D, I would say it's more previz, but it's in animation. It's still categorized, as layout because that used to be what the old process was back in the day when it was 2D. So it's it's an interesting history for it. It's a good question.
I guess we could call it Viz. If we were being more accurate.
It's true. Viz. It's the first like digital viz, like you've said, or something. So
this is another listener question we got, which is, does the head of layout come up with the overall visual language of the film? Kind of like a director of photography or cinematographer of a live action film. Would love to hear more about this process.
Yes, I would say it is part of the process, because one of the things that happens before we even get workbook turnovers or something is the head of layout will actually go through and work with the director and the lighter and look at the movie and actually create the visual language of it. And sometimes I think we called it like the cinematics Bible, or it's, I know on Raya, Rob did it, Nathan did it, and it's usually a PDF or a file that we have on the server in Google Docs or something, where they put this kind of PowerPoint presentation where for each sequence they'll show examples of what the mood and what the shot composition and stuff like that that they're thinking of doing for the sequence.
That is so cool.
And I remember like on Raya, for the sequence we're working on, it was very dark. And Rob really wanted to play with silhouettes and shadows, and, not be afraid to go too dark with it, and, have certain moods for lighting and stuff like that. So in some cases, they'll put like little stills or animated GIFs from different movies to show you examples of what they're shooting for. Cool. And then they'll do a breakdown and talk about, this is the points we want to, go over. These are the low angle shots we want to convey to give you this mood. And so they'll go sequence by sequence and kind of do a breakdown of what they think the sequence should kind of feel like, or the story of the cinematography. And in some cases too, that's part of, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rocco, part of the pitch with the directors when they first jump on board, that they kind of talk about the cinematic language and they put something together that for the overall movie can kind of help set the mood of what they're shooting for. As well. And they'll get direct feedback from the directors and they'll kind of work on that. But there's always some kind of either verbal or visual representation of what they're trying to do from scene to scene and how that plays in the overall movie.
Got it.
Because it could start off darker, but then end lighter, with happier shots. And believe it or not, there is a way to do happier shots.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Yeah, in our industry, because lighting happens at the end of the pipeline and layout is right at the front, the cinematographer is sort of split in half. So, and the titles are Director of Cinematography Layout and Director of Cinematography Lighting.
Oh, wow.
So they're two sides of the same coin that make up what I guess the live action world would consider a complete cinematographer. And they work together to make these cinematography pitches that Dorian was talking about. And I think Raya was done particularly cleverly because Rob and Adolf came up with their pitch knowing the story was still in flux, and they couldn't get specific about certain things that happened in the story, but they knew the beats that a story takes. They know, there's the uplifting moment, there's the fall, there's the redemption, there are these different beats that happen throughout a story. And themes. There's going to be a theme to this story. And so they were able to, in addition to working simply on a sequence level, they're working across the whole film using lenses and focus to sort of define the accomplishment of the theme and where the theme was on its journey or the film was on its journey of the theme.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really clever.
Yeah, I wish more people could see like that PowerPoint presentation in like the world, because I feel like a lot of people would geek out about that. I don't know if that's ever public. It's probably more just internally studio, but I don't know. That'd be super cool.
Yeah, I think so. I doubt we can probably show all the lifts we take from other movies.
That makes sense. Yeah. So this next question is a little broad, but we'll see where we go with it. It's from at cvest.therom. General rules of thumb for staging would be awesome. And you guys have already mentioned some things like rule of thirds, crossing the line, etc. But just kind of, off the cuff, if there are quick things that come to mind, concepts that somebody new might need to know.
Well, there are a lot.
Yeah.
One thing, matching angles, I think, is a very overlooked thing. When you're shooting two characters who are talking to each other, it's nice if the cameras each have the same angle on each of those characters.
Oh,
So if they're both 10 degrees off 12 o'clock,
okay.
make them both 10 degrees. The same thing goes for tilts. I like to balance tilts so that a 5 degree up is often balanced with a 5 degree down.
Got it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Up
that's
and down
really
at
good.
characters. And I often go through a sequence just to tune that up. And I will just type in 5 and hit return. And I'll go through all the ups and all the downs and do 5, -5, 5, -5. And I'll just see how it looks. And I'll move the cameras to the right place and see, does this look better than what I had before? Or am I making it worse? Is there a reason to be more extreme or less extreme, or to have them mismatched? But matching your overs and matching your singles, matching your angles in conversation is great. The crossing the line is a huge one.
Yeah. And I would just add, like, understand how in real life they shoot it. Understand that there's cranes and dollies and, stuff like that. Right now, the big new thing that they added, I mean, not now, but one of the new things is a spider cam. I don't know if you guys know what that spider cam is. So you've seen it in the Super Bowl where the camera's on a wire and it's, it moves. It can move at a remarkable fast rate. And I've seen that used on set in real life.
Wow.
Of them, because the actor's running and the camera has to keep up with them.
Yeah.
But you can't lay a track down and stuff like that. So the biggest thing that helps, and I think that helped me, is once you understand like what tripods are, what tracks are, and stuff like that. And you don't need to like know how to set them up or stuff, but just know how they move and how they set up shots, because the whole cinematic language that we're using now was based on that. And even though in the computer, you can kind of forget that those rules or those types of setups that we take for granted, and go everywhere. Use lenses that are too wide for a close-up. Use lenses that are too long for a wide. So, and in some cases, that's actually a creative choice. And different directors use different, cameras and lenses for different types of feelings of what they do. So, just see films and look at some of the camera equipment and how they set up stuff, and just realize how the camera actually moves in real life, and try to mimic that.
That's great.
That is a very, very good thing. On Dinosaur, they had the Dino Cam, which was a camera on a wire that would just run along great lengths. And I think they got it from a football stadium.
Wow.
But
That's a spider cam.
Yeah. It was because they needed to chase a herd of dinosaurs across a live action ground plane.
Yeah.
So that's what they set up.
Oh,
with the Dino
wow.
Now it's drones.
Yeah. I have seen that where cameramen receive cameras from drones and then take them on a Steadicam rig.
Oh my gosh.
If you want to see one of the coolest sequences, there's a movie called The Raid, and they made 2 of them, The Raid 1 and The Raid 2. And they pride themselves on doing one continuous camera move.
Okay.
And it's so impressive. I think it's The Raid 2, the prison scene. But they go to the special features and look at the making of, and they show how they went from like a bathroom stall and they went all the way, and there's little tricks they do that, you're in the wall, but you don't know it. And then they move the camera and they put the wall back in. And, they've been doing that stuff since Citizen Kane. But, just look at the making ofs and see how they're moving the camera and how they hand off stuff and stuff like that. It's all really interesting. And a lot of that stuff always kind of sparks ideas of just like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. But again, they're all sticking to trying to stay to the same composition, follow the characters. And I would say, I guess another tip for a rule of thumb is don't let the character leave the frame. A lot of times the camera will move before the character moves. So the character always leads the shot. And that can go from, that can feel very unnatural when the camera's anticipating the move. Yeah. And that's a common thing I see too, where I was just like,
that makes
because in real life the person moves and the camera guy's trying to keep up. So that's something to be aware of. And also too, like making sure if something is jumping in and out of frame and stuff, trying to keep it in the camera, even as just a foot or a leg. Once it leaves the frame and it comes back in, it feels very unnatural. And for a frame or two, the audience goes, where is it? What's going on? And then it jumps in and you're like, wait, what? As opposed to maybe just having a part of that character in the frame as it comes down and comes back into frame. So little stuff like that you'll kind of notice, but a lot of it is in just looking at films and looking how they set up the shots.
I think that sort of relates to my work with the animation department in that a lot of my adjustments are making sure a camera isn't leading the characters. Or the particular hard ones are when a character moves really quickly, but we've got to have the camera lag behind it. And yet we have to keep that character from getting really off frame. Yeah. A lot of challenges happen there. That's a good point. This is sort of related to animation and editing, but takes place in layout. And that's just make sure you're cutting for a reason. And if needed, put something in to motivate that cut. If you need to have a cut and there's no reason to have it yet, except that you need to get someplace else, see what you can do with a head turn. Or just something to make that camera want to go to the next thing. You can use performance to drive the camera. It just can't, just can't make it obvious. But there's certain things you can do with a character, and that will make it feel like the camera needs to go someplace else. Sometimes it's just a little bit of a turn, start a motion, have the action across a cut. You can get away with a lot of things by just tweaking the performance at that cut area.
You just touched on something really big, which was editing. Having a good, if we're going back to the, some tips on layout and stuff, is having a good sense of editing, actually. Knowing when a shot's too long to cut. And we do that all the time. And that's part of the process too, is we get the storyboards, and the storyboards have the shots to be 350 frames. But then when you actually do it, it only needs to be 150 frames and stuff. So, we'll consciously cut that off. And if the editor wants more, then we'll more than happy add more. But, seeing the shots in sequence and having the edit kind of in your head or filling out how the edit's playing, that's also another part that I don't think we've touched on too much, but it is pretty important. It's kind of unspoken sometimes.
It's just crazy how much layout encompasses so many other editing, animation, everything. It's crazy. It really Story.
Is. Yeah.
And we're not trying to step on editors, feet or anything. It's a very collaborative process, but there are situations where you would put your little edit together, and sometimes it works, and sometimes they want a little more or this or that. So you are also taking a little bit of stab of that as well, but that's based on what they gave you too, and now you're using stuff for real. But there's every frame of painting on that website. They have, it's got one of the best action editing things that Jackie Chan, when he does his films, he edits a certain way. And the funny thing is the camera's not really moving at all, but it conveys 10 times more, impact of danger and stuff than some of the modern films that they compare it to, where it's just a bunch of shaky cam and people punching each other. And you look at his films, and they've got 10 times more of an impact, but the camera's not even moving at all. He just cuts at the right point and double cuts action.
Okay.
So when it punches someone, you know, you don't exactly cut on the frame and have that punch finish. You actually have a little 5 or 10 frames. 10 frames is a lot. Maybe 5 frames extra of that punch coming back in. And so they're technically getting hit twice, but when you see it in the edit, it looks like it's one continuous shot, and it actually has more impact. And that's something we're always aware of too, of double editing and double cuts, trying to make sure if we're giving the editor something, we're actually giving him just a little more in case they want to do that as well.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah. Camera height is another thing.
Oh yeah.
We used to keep our cameras at, you know, cheek level or above on in a lot of our princess musicals, I guess is the best way to describe them. And we've broken away from that now. We're doing more lower cameras than we used to. But I think the most important thing to think about is have an idea of why your cameras are low or high or at character height. And just make a conscious choice. I think a lot of people just deal with camera heights kind of by composing a shot that they think looks nice, but they don't really think about why the camera's there. If it's too high, it tends to be more of a security camera or a God's eye view. If it's too low, it can make the character overly heroic or dominant, or just feel like something on the floor is looking at that character. And if you aren't supporting it with the rest of the sequence, it could be out of place.
Yeah.
Man, you just triggered one of the most important rules of thumb to answer this question. Is don't use the same camera lens for every single shot. That's a common student thing where they just use the default Maya 35 millimeter lens, and the close-ups are the same 35, the wides, and you know, I've made that mistake, you know, when I was learning the process. But you have to understand that, you know, we use different lenses for different types of shots, and that's a huge thing that people don't really learn when they start in the process, especially at school, is there's different lenses, and use the different lenses for different situations.
It's kind of based on like the live action rules a little bit, I would imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, you know, if you're doing a close up, 9 out of 10, it's going to be a 50 millimeter on the person as they're talking or something like that, or higher, 85 and stuff like that. I know, like on Encanto, I remember Nathan saying that some of the characters were modeled for 50 millimeter. So anytime we did a close-up, if we did less than a 50 millimeter, they would look weird, you know. And we had to be very conscious of keeping the camera at a distance when using certain lenses, as opposed to when you get up close to them.
Interesting.
So yeah, look at your lenses and how you're using your lenses.
Oh my gosh, for the future, that's like a great tip jar for months from now whenever we do the modeling episode. That's like, I never even crossed my mind you might have that in mind at that stage. That is super cool.
Because I'm sure you guys have, like, you know, the model sheet, the camera, you know, the character model, and how not to warp them too much because it's unappealing, you know.
Right.
Yeah,
Totally.
So the same kind of thing is with camera. We don't want to make it ugly, and we don't want to make your guys' work ugly because we got the wrong lenses and we you know, did something that we weren't supposed to do.
I have a quick workflow question for you guys related to this, which is, do you have any kind of library of existing cameras for different shots or anything that you use like in the production process to streamline anything like that? Or like even like I'm always curious about like, oh, I see that they use walk cycles on the character, and I'm wondering just about that very logistical workflow at the studio.
Do you mean like an animation library for cameras?
Yeah, exactly. Like, do you ever have anything that you would just plop into a scene that you use somewhere else or anything like that? Or are you always just creating the camera in the file? Or
I have a few camera shakes that I keep around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I need an impact of a certain feeling.
Yeah, when we get the camera, by default, there's usually a lens package that comes with it.
Okay. Gotcha.
So it'll start at usually 21 and kind of go down. And also, too, when we go to live action, if we're prevising, the first thing we'll do before we start anything is we'll talk to the DP and say, what camera are you using and what lenses are you using and what do you prefer?
Yeah.
We would ask that with the director as well.
Okay.
'Cause some directors, depending on their style, they like certain lenses and this and that. And we want to make sure that camera information translates into the digital form.
Yeah.
So we're not, stabbing at air. And so at Disney, I mean, we do have the lens package of just what they prefer for the sequence. And that's what the head of layout did beforehand to get that information. And then also, like Rocco was saying, we have camera shake. And that camera shake is kind of on all the cameras on the shows. And those camera shakes, you can turn it on and it'll have kind of a walking shake to it.
Yeah.
And then we have a car, I think it's called car idle or car running or something. It basically gives you that vibration of like as if your camera was strapped on the hood of a muscle car and it had that shake.
Yeah.
And
cool.
so it's not just those presets that are in there. There's not a lot in there. I think there's like 8 or 10 or something.
Be, yeah.
But within those presets, there's a lot of, each preset has a significant amount of ways you can tweak it. So you can tweak it in translates so that maybe you want to up the camera translate or lower down the camera translate. And the XYZ, all those channels are in there that we can manipulate. So maybe it's going more left and right instead of up and down. And that goes in rotation as well. So we can tweak how much frequency we want for the translates and rotates. And then above that, tweak how much amplitude we want as well. So it's like when I was on Star Wars, it was just like one thing. And then over the years, like it's evolved because people started trying to incorporate more live action into the cameras. And, here at Disney, it's probably got like the most options I've ever seen, but it makes sense when you think about it. And it's good that we have those options.
That's super.
And you can just leave them at the presets and walk away and do your keys of when it starts and stops, or you can go in there and really start finessing it. And I think Corey definitely knows a little bit more about that.
It's funny that a lot of those shakes were recorded on our camera capture stage with an actual camera.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Mocap stage we had set up, and I suppose we still do. It's sort of become the virtual reality lab now.
Right.
But at one point we took a camera weighted rig down there, and I think for the running, Joaquin was on a treadmill. We had hauled into the room, and he was holding the camera rig, and we recorded that. And that's where some of our shakes came from. I think some were actually hand animated, and there are these 5,000 frame cycles. That we can sample different times from or tweak all the amplitude and frequency of. On top of those, I have a small library of just individual shake bits that I can apply. Although I find most of the time I'm hand keying anyway for a camera shake because it's just so specific.
Yeah.
But related to the shakes, a lot of those I don't touch them as much as I used to. Unless there's a reason to. If they were too big or too small coming out of layout for where the sequence is gone in animation, I might tweak it. But generally, I now leave it to Elfin, because they're going to get the whole sequence back, and they'll be able to balance all the shakes across.
Okay, yeah.
So I might hit up specific shake moments. Or I might tone down the shake if you're having trouble seeing your character while you're animating, or if there's a weird bump that came out of the shake frequency that is just causing you to miss your arcs or not be able to get your characters in the right place. But mostly I leave the camera shake to Elfin to take care of because they have a better oversight over the whole sequence.
How it's coming together. But I think that's probably about as close to a preset that we have. But as far as like dropping in the cameras, every camera move is very different. I think the closest, when Rocco was mentioning dialogue scenes, we do have the luxury of if we like that camera and we cut to the next camera and we need to cut back, we just duplicate the camera and move it over here. And, now we have that over here now, so there are some little stuff like that, but everything, is just kind of done on the spot and stuff. And it's just because one setup will never work for another setup, no matter how much cleanup you do and how much stuff you set up. because the sets are different, the terrain's different.
Yeah.
The characters are different sizes and scales. It's just, it'd probably be more work actually to try to tweak it from something that exists than to just do it from scratch.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Totally.
Well,
It's relatable.
Yeah.
yeah. Now it's time for the tip jar. Nice, some real life Foley going on here. So for the tip jar, we actually, this time we're going to do it a little different. We're going to prompt you guys with a question. And that is that we would love to hear from you, either the best piece of advice you've ever received or anything you wish you knew as a student or young professional that you now know.
Absolutely. I think the best thing I ever learned at the studio was that good ideas can come from anywhere. And I think about that phrase a lot. Good ideas can come from anywhere. Also says to me that I might not be the best person at my job, or at even within my field, I may not be the best at solving this particular problem. But another part of that is, because good ideas can come from anywhere, it really means you have to leave your ego out of the equation. Mm-hmm. And when somebody comes up with an idea that's different than what you thought of, even if it's your field of focus and your specialty and your job to have that idea, if their idea is better, their idea is better, and they're not trying to lessen you as a person or show that they're a better artist than you are. We're in a studio with 900 people who are excellent at their jobs and excellent at a lot of things you don't even know about, because you've only interacted with them on a professional level. Yeah. Everybody's got skills. Everybody's got ideas. And most importantly, they are all trying to make the movie as good as it can be. So in the worst case scenario, you've just got different ideas of what is good, but it has nothing to do with ego. It's just about finding out which idea the directors actually want, and meeting that idea. The best idea should always win. I talked earlier about how I was very protective of the layout cameras originally when they went into animation, and I grew out of that. And a lot of that was just letting go of ego. It was letting go of my thoughts that the layout was done correctly and that's what should stay. The layout was done at a moment in time, and the film evolves. And what was right then might not be right now, or what was right then just might not have landed at the best thing yet. It might have just been a step on the way. And that's where we're at now. So evaluate things for their value, not for where they came from. And don't let your own ego get in the way.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I would say be honest if you don't know anything about it.
That's great.
I love that.
All the time, I'll be like, I don't know. Like I really don't know. And, the people around you will kind of give you more respect as if you were trying to pull one over on them. So I've always felt like the more honest I am, and the more questions I ask and stuff like that, don't be scared to admit it. And, the faster you do it or the sooner you do it, the more you can get the answer, because people around you are there to help you. So don't be scared to, not know something, and let people know. And I'd also say, like, the second thing is just be nice to everybody, because, I know, especially in animation, you're going to be working with the people for a long time. And in live action, people come and go and stuff like that. But even there, it's a team effort, and you want to make sure that everyone's on board and they all want to work with each other and they want to be nice to each other and stuff like that. So don't be mean. Try not to be mean to people. And if you do, apologize quickly. Just try. There's a lot of stress that happens in the industry, and a lot of stuff that, you don't anticipate and stuff like that. And it is a stressful job, and we do work a lot of overtime and stuff, but just try to keep cool and, just try to be nice, because you're going to be seeing that person or these people again, down the road. If not now, then maybe in the future. And, I know we especially work with people that they're coordinators now, and then next thing you know, they're your boss, producers, and, and the guy I was sitting next to at my desk, now he's my supervisor, so that stuff is very common and it happens all the time. So the nicer you are, the better. Yeah.
Awesome.
Gosh, these are all fantastic. So good. Yeah. Thank you both so much.
Nuggets.
All right, so we're coming to the end of the episode here, and before wrapping things up, we wanted to give our guests a quick opportunity to plug anything if they would like. So I think Dorian maybe had a little something.
I do have a small Instagram. It's called Layout Sketches, so you can find it on Instagram.
Nice.
We'll
link you in the show notes.
Yes.
Yes, definitely will do. So this is the part where we now transition to plugging our social media network, which is basically our Instagram. That's at Animation Happy Hour. You can also check out our website, animationhappyhour.com, or email us at animationhappyhour@gmail.com. And I believe that's pretty much all of our social media presence right now.
That's right.
So last episode, we announced, or rather I announced, that we are going to pick one review to gift a T-shirt to as a thank you. So the way this works is we will read a review, and the reviewer's, sort of username or handle or whatever they associate with the review. So if you listen to this and you hear your review read, please get in contact with us either on Instagram, direct messages, or on our Gmail. You can email us at animationhappyhour@gmail.com. Let us know that you were the one who left us the review. And if I don't know that you really have to prove it, but hopefully honor system will work here. And if we get two people claiming they're the reviewer, we will, we'll see what we do. But
stop the contest.
But yes, so this is something we're going to do monthly because we love to read your reviews and they do help us out. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of incentivize that process. So our very first reviewer who we are going to gift a T-shirt to is BZ Junior 94. And this person said, I'm a graphic designer in the DFW area. I guess that's Dallas Fort Worth, probably.
I think so.
Who also does video and portraiture. I have learned so much about my own work just from listening to this podcast, and so many themes such as design, soft skills, how to work on a creative team, and how to grow as an artist are applicable to any craft. Also, they are so fun to listen to. My wife and baby walk by as I laugh washing dishes with my AirPods in. Probably think I'm a crazy person. For real, though, highly recommend to anybody or anyone wanting to get better as an artist in general. So, yay! Thank you.
Thank you.
Get in contact and we will work out sending a T-shirt to you. Thanks again.
Awesome. So that about wraps up the episode. This has been Garrett,
Katie,
Ben,
Rocco,
and Dorian. Thanks for listening, and
happy animating.